You're listening to Transformation at Work, your one-stop guide to Salesforce success. And this is Project Rewind, real stories of business transformation and Salesforce success in our customers' own words. Our Gerent practice leaders and real Salesforce users are sitting down for an in-depth look at the challenges they faced and how digital tools help them improve processes and deliver outstanding results. In this episode, we're kicking off a multi-part deep dive into different approaches to Salesforce implementation and how those approaches helped real Gerent clients achieve their business goals. Specifically, we're looking at the innovation blueprint, an approach to implementation that happens before a more comprehensive Salesforce deployment takes place, with a focus on outlining an achievable strategy that diagnoses key pain points and maps where Salesforce will offer the most impact for an organization. We're joined in this episode by two real Gerent clients.
Barry Ambrosio, Chief Information Officer for Victaulic.
My name is Andrew Winker, and I work with Solugen. I work as our Associate Director of Commercial Operations.
For both Solugen and Victaulic, taking the time to build a plan with a technology partner before deployment led to incredible gains in efficiency and a better experience overall. But interestingly, both businesses arrived at Salesforce at markedly different points in their company's history. In Solugen's case, that decision came early. In its 5 years of operations, Solugen has been particularly successful, which is wonderful. But that growth, while promising, does raise long-term questions, particularly, as Andrew puts it, around how to sustain and support that growth from a technical standpoint.
So Solugen is about 5 years old or so, and so we've been going through a rocket ship-like trajectory where back, I think, in 2021, we just raised our Series C round, and so we're really looking at what does it look like for us to grow over the next several years, and knew a part of that would be making sure we have the right infrastructure to support that growth.
Now, that challenge might seem like it has an easy answer. Just implement the right technology on the front end that can support the core functions of the business. But, as Andrew breaks down here, the solution that suits the needs of a new company might not fit the needs of that same business as it grows in any number of directions.
As we started on that journey, we really kind of looked under the hood at what we currently had. So we currently had a version of Salesforce installed kind of out of the box that had not necessarily been fit for purpose for our business. And so setting out knew that we needed to make some changes. We realized the breadth of those changes. We thought it was good for us to step back and make sure that as an organization, we were aligned on what are the processes that we're actually automating before building a tool that might create more chaos than resolution.
That kind of proactive planning, stepping back as the company starts to grow, that's a really valuable step. But for older and more established organizations, the reality is that's not always an option. Businesses grow the way they grow, and processes emerge naturally from that. This is the way of things. And oftentimes, as Mario points out, team leaders have to step back and say, how do we make those processes as well aligned as possible before we start deploying new technology?
Victaulic, in its 100-year history, has evolved, but along the way, we've been afforded an immense amount of autonomy. With that, it spawned unique ways of doing things.
Which brings us to Victaulic. As a long-standing organization, Victaulic already had processes well in place, which meant that when it came time to consider new technologies, it required evaluating how to make those processes align with a new solution.
We saw this as an opportunity for us to align our business units and try to achieve or strive for opportunities where we can standardize where it makes sense, bring all of the key stakeholders together, take that step back and look at our end-to-end processes and be able to flesh out where those opportunities are, where we can align globally.
In both cases, whether as a new organization experiencing growth or an established business reevaluating its processes, those questions bring with them a sense of uncertainty. Simply put, how do you make Salesforce work with the core functions of your business and the processes in place that underpin those functions? And with that uncertainty, there comes the risk of rapidly expanding horizons, often at the expense of clarity of scope.
Is the customer able to narrow the conversation down to a specific project?
That's Anandi Narayanan, Gerent's Senior Vice President of Business Transformation and Strategy and Manufacturing Practice Lead. Anandi has overseen many different Salesforce implementations, and as she puts it, that inability to answer that question decisively, that's often the sign that there's more strategy work needed before a Salesforce deployment can be truly successful.
Are they adding new conversations or new topics, or saying, can you meet with this other team also? And can you start meeting with these other team members? And as I meet other team members, I will start to notice their needs may not be collapsing together. They're really fundamentally talking about with their complementary business processes, which might then have now more ancillary needs associated to them, right? Like you can start to see the scope not narrowing, the scope continues to broaden. And when I start to see an indication of the scope broadening, and whoever is the decision maker saying, we don't have a clear cut approach to how we want to decide how to do this, then I will say, hey, sounds like we need to take a step back.
It's in those moments when scope is uncertain, exact pain points are not precisely defined, and there's added strategy work needed before a Salesforce deployment can happen, that Anandi instead calls for an innovation blueprint. A strategic approach to implementation in which, rather than build anything directly, the technology partner lays out a map for what a Salesforce deployment could look like that aligns processes and ensures the best success down the road. Here's how Anandi describes it.
We're not building on the platform in these engagements. In other implementation styles or engagement styles, we're actually physically doing the implementation, whether in a slower approach because it's a longer project, or in a quick start fashion because there's a desire for time to value, let's say within 2 weeks or 4 weeks. But you're actually building something, and the bulk of the engagement is about what you're configuring, and you're trying to get to understanding the requirements and then how to actually configure the product to support those requirements. Whereas in a strategy engagement, you're not building anything. You're focused on designing, and you're focused on designing the right answer to meet a set of business objectives.
As Anandi points out, this kind of approach offers some key advantages for businesses that are uncertain about how best to leverage Salesforce for their needs.
So really the advantage I see is when an organization is interested in exploring all the areas for which a platform like Salesforce can really serve in helping solve some key business problems, and wants to kind of put it all together before they venture on what portion might they begin that implementation on. And it happens mainly in companies where the need to transform, there's so many business users and business teams and functioning sort of screaming and asking for their area of the business to be re-rationalized. And in the IT organization, they're thinking, well, we can re-rationalize everybody in isolation, or we can start to look at this picture as a whole, especially if part of our goal is to simplify our IT landscape. And so then they need to convince themselves, is the platform going to be the answer to support some of the simplification? And perhaps what other technologies might need to complement that in order to keep our landscape simple, but still meet the needs of the business. And so now you need to understand the needs of the business, not within one team, but you're starting to need to break apart and understand teams that are downstream implicated or upstream implicated, and the synergies between teams. And in most organizations, companies don't know how exactly the other team does their part. They know how they do their part, and they might have a narrow point of view and want to improve the way they work, but they don't know how to import information that someone else is giving them, or how to export the information to somebody who might need something from them, because it's out of per se their purview, and they haven't spent a lot of cycles trying to understand that. And so in these strategy engagements, we start to understand the teams as a whole, independent of functions and silos. So we can start to thread that. Imagine a bit of a quilt, right? And you're starting to thread and bring the pieces together. And as you thread and bring the pieces together, sometimes becomes really obvious, hey, there's like this value stream that makes a lot of sense to transform. And there's a lot of different actors and players that are going to be implicated in that entire stream.
That innovation blueprint process was, as Andrew describes it, the heart of what really made the implementation process so successful for Solugen.
There's definitely an internal process, I think, for us as an organization, and then external as we work with the team to help us kind of sort out where we're going to go. So internally first, I mean, for us, it looks like getting the right stakeholders involved. We were making changes that impacted our order to cash process, as well as kind of our broader pipeline. So that involved bringing in folks from across the organization and bringing people on board. So lots of different people and stakeholders to coordinate internally. What that manifested in externally is we were working with the Gerent team. I mean, this was still kind of in a relatively soon after COVID world. So everyone was remote. And what that looks like for us is getting our team around the table to discuss and really flesh out some of our foundational processes and understanding how do things actually work today, taking kind of a future back view and, hey, how do we want this to work in the future? So there was a series of workshops where we sat down and talked through that with the Gerent team together that took course over the timeline of several weeks.
And Mario saw the same process play out at Victaulic, coupled with another crucial aspect of an innovation blueprint engagement, and that is giving internal teams the opportunity to break down silos and redefine how they relate to one another so they can focus on finding the best possible finished result.
You've got, roles that were built around processes that have been there forever. So I think individuals coming in and engaging in this process, and there were a lot of questions in terms of challenging the team to think a little bit broader. And so that made them a little uneasy because obviously, we've got, as an organization, we've got individuals, it's not uncommon or unheard of for someone to have 20, 30 years experience within Victaulic. And many of them have been in the same role. So these are the individuals that were the architects for a lot of these processes and leveraging a lot of the subsets or the technologies that they've deployed. So I think, there was a bit of an apprehension on their part because they're looking at it going, wait a minute, does this mean that now what I'm responsible for have put into place is being called into question? And it's always that fine line in terms of, trying to reassure them that it's not so much calling their abilities or what they've done or some of the decisions that they've made to get to this point. That's not being called into question. It's basically now taking that step back and looking at where the organization is, how we align our processes and technology. Does it align with our overall strategy? And we're no different than any other organization that's, had double-digit growth for many years. You are embedded and ingrained in the day-to-day and never have that opportunity to take a step back and look at whether how you execute or the technology that you leverage, does it still make sense? And I think this process was great at giving us that opportunity to take that step back. But as I said, earlier, the challenge was trying to get individuals to be open or transparent and, have that unencumbered discussion without holding back and thinking, wait a minute, is my role being called into question? Is my past decisions being called into questions? And that isn't the case at all. So we've had some change management support along the way to help our teams through this. And I can't stress the importance of that as well as, when you embark on an initiative such as this.
It's here where Mario and Andrew both agree. A technology partner, especially one specifically experienced in building a strategic plan and identifying where Salesforce could have the most impact, is really vital. Having someone who knows how to pull teams back, how to facilitate discussions of where to start, and how to approach it fresh, all of that can be a huge difference maker when it comes to adoption. Here's how Mario puts it.
And when I reflect back, I think that's what we try to do is detach yourself from, the platforms or the technologies or the tools that you use today. But we're a classic example of that where, the technology is the process and the process is the technology. It's become so intertwined. But the unfortunate thing is it's, again, because we haven't taken that step back, I think we've evolved where, it's almost like we're just layering technology on top of technology, trying to solve for something that if you had the opportunity to take a step back and say, if I were to do this greenfield or with a clean slate, how would I approach it? And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be starkly different than how you got there today. So, but yeah, trying to get the team to think out of the box is probably the biggest challenge in this. I think that's where, facilitating the discussion, went a long way. And I think one of the key benefits as well with the facilitators is they did have that blend of business along with the technology. So I think it helped alleviate some of the apprehension and tension.
For Solugen, the real value of that technology partner showed itself when it came to discussions of scope. In talking about the tech, especially with growing orgs, it's easy to want to rush headlong and make changes left, right, and center. But by taking the time with a seasoned partner prior to implementation, Solugen had a clear understanding of the ripple effects that a change could bring about.
I think that whenever you first start off and think about an implementation project, it's difficult to envision everything that has to change down the future. It's difficult to hold in parallel the day-to-day of my process, getting things done, whether we're working with customers, working with people in the plant, but then also thinking of this longer-term change. And so I think that assessing the size of that change and figuring out exactly what questions we were trying to answer before jumping to build solutions. And I think in part, it would have been a much worse outcome if we had just jumped into any kind of implementation. I think it's critical to have the internal clarity before just trying to outsource a problem to someone else to fix. So I think that it was helpful for us. I think it probably unearthed areas even further internally where we needed to discuss to rally around what we wanted to build in the future.
The end result of all of this, keeping scope in check, bringing key stakeholders on board, breaking down silos, and taking the time to truly understand the strategy and implications that came with implementation, was pretty significant for both Solugen and Victaulic. As Andrew puts it, Solugen came away with a clearer vision of how they could leverage Salesforce to truly overhaul their operations.
I think that where we are right now, especially what immediately came after that, was us really kind of overhauling our CRM instance, in Salesforce and really thinking about our pipeline differently. So I think that the value for us is being able to have the data and the infrastructure that allows us to do that quickly. Obviously, change takes a long time to fully come around the adoption curve, but I think we've got the groundwork in place to be able to look at those things in a data-driven way that helps us make decisions based on not just gut feel. I mean, you never want to get rid of the intuition, and the ability to act quickly. And my hope is I think what we got out of this project was understanding of what we were really trying to answer, how we really wanted to look at our pipeline and certain things as we discussed internally, and then having the system in place to make that easy to do as a company and to be able to get that data relatively quickly was very helpful.
And for Mario, that strategic work up front meant not just re-envisioning how tech could impact the business, but reimagining how teams within the organization could work together to push their productivity and success even further.
Probably one of the biggest ones. So we are a sales-centric organization. But again, I think the autonomy that we've been afforded over the years, has gotten in our way. So we've had, these different disciplines, whether it's sales, whether it's operations, whomever, pretty much siloed. And I think one of the biggest value that we've gotten through this, being able to take that step back and look at the full end-to-end and be able to present a different perspective from what people are accustomed to, and being able to see that end-to-end and realize, gone are the days where you can operate pretty much in a silo. One of the biggest values that we've gotten from this is, again, being able to have that end-to-end view, have all of the stakeholders at the table, and one of the participants knowing, I know how I impact or potentially could impact my neighbor to the left, and I know how my neighbor to the right can impact me as well. So I think having that dialogue has been able to give us a completely different perspective, and I look at it even, the follow on after that in terms of how we've started to think through in trying to solve some of our business challenges has changed significantly.
In both Solugen and Victaulic's cases, working through an innovation blueprint engagement, taking the time to plan and strategize their implementation prior to launch, paid off incredibly well and was a crucial step in ensuring Salesforce was a success within their organization. As Andrew puts it, knowing what questions to ask, what you're solving for, and how you plan to get there prior to launch means that you're not wasting effort on the wrong solutions.
Know what questions you're trying to answer on the front end, or know what questions to ask. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time answering the wrong ones. And I think that's the habit that I think can apply to so many things. But I think that the advice I would give would be make sure that you know what you're solving for, and that applies to us as well. Because the downside is you rally a bunch of organizational change towards something and a lot of change towards an area that isn't exactly what you're looking for. Then people get burned out on the disappointment of something being overpromised. So I think really having clarity on the front end of what the goal is and what the organizational needs are to execute on that is really important.
And as Mario sees it, bringing the right people on board and ensuring you've got buy-in across the organization is one of the biggest difference makers when it comes to a Salesforce implementation.
So the first one goes back to executive engagement. I think that definitely goes a long way. That serves two purposes. One is ensuring that we're aligned from a strategy standpoint. I think it's going to go a long way in terms of mobilizing or enabling or orienting the organization to make sure that we're all headed down the same path. So that's probably one of the most important pieces. And secondly, getting commitment from the business to free up the resources. I think in fairness to the individuals that are assigned, I would give them the opportunity to be able to be seconded to an initiative such as this and be able to solely focus on this goes a long way.
And when it comes to advice for businesses considering Salesforce implementation, Anandi goes to the core of what Mario and Andrew both identified. If your organization is struggling to define success with Salesforce, that might mean that you need to bring someone in to help you outline what that success can look like.
I think that if you're in any organization where you feel like you're required to sort of help facilitate this decision-making skill with your business partners, and you don't know necessarily how to convince yourself which products are the right products that can support that decision-making skill, I would say, taking an approach like this will really help you, at least bare minimum, you're going to understand how your business works. Even if you don't take the recommendations, you actually have a really valuable asset that stitches your business together, which allows you, again, to have a strong perspective of how does the business operate? And so how do we want to talk about the kinds of problems we're solving for? And if you have a continuous improvement organization already who's already kind of designing business processes, that's already great. But if you don't have that, this is a great stepping stone for any IT leader to really just put their arms around the businesses that they're supporting from a systems landscape perspective.
This has been Transformation at Work. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Mario, Andrew, and Anandi for your incredible insights throughout the episode. Transformation at Work is, as always, produced by Gerent in collaboration with Salesforce. I am Jeff Stormer, your host and producer. If you enjoyed the show, consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify, or head to gerent.com to sign up for email updates when we release new episodes. Until next time, thank you again for listening, and we hope to see you again soon.